What's up everyone, and welcome back to another episode on this channel. We're finally back with the Nissan Micra, and in this one we're gonna install this short ratio gearbox that's actually from another Nissan Micra. It's from the 1.0 version, and it has, as I stated, shorter gears, so that hopefully the acceleration will be faster. In theory it will be around 12% faster, so we'll just see about that. So let's go ahead and make some before and after measurements and compare the acceleration. It will be super interesting to see. And I've actually already gone ahead and made some before measurements when the car was completely stock. So let's go ahead and show you some of that footage right here. So before I measure any before and after accelerations, I definitely want to install a rev counter, because as it is right now, this car doesn't come with one. But I found a second-hand one that comes with the rev counter, and according to the internet forums, this should be plug and play. So I guess we'll find out. But before we install it, let's give it a quick wipe down and a quick once over with the polisher. And after that, the cluster looked brand new once again. The swap is really simple, just 5 screws in total, and everything comes off really easily. And as we're going to see, the plug were identical, so it's a straight swap. Okay, moment of truth here. Will it work? That is so nice. It actually works. And the revs seems to be accurate as well. Let's give it a couple of revs. What you're seeing here is footage when I tested the acceleration when the car still was bone stock. This will be a really interesting baseline to compare with after I'm done with all of the modifications. And as we can see, the best 20 to 70 kilometers an hour was 6.77 seconds. And I also tried 0 to 100, which is about the same as 0 to 60 for miles per hour. And the best time there was 12.66 seconds. So there we go. Now that you've seen that, let's go ahead and put this car up on the lift so that I can start to remove the transmission. Now this video montage definitely will make this job look a whole lot easier than it actually is. If it's your first time removing a transmission or an engine or something of that nature, make sure you do very thorough research beforehand. That can save you a lot of time and frustration down the road. As we can see, the battery is already removed, so let's proceed with removing the battery tray so that we can access the transmission from above. I find it way easier to just remove the entire bracket for the clutch cable rather than fighting with the cable itself. When doing a bigger job like this, I definitely think it's a good idea to keep everything organized right from the start, just so that I won't have to spend half an hour looking for one single bolt when it comes to reassembly. The crank sensor was completely stuck to the transmission casing, so rather than removing the sensor itself, I just disconnect the electrical connector on top of the engine. Speaking of sensors to disconnect, there are 4 in total. The speed sensor, crank sensor that I mentioned, the neutral switch, and then the reverse switch. Then we also need to remove the shift linkage, which is super easy to disconnect. It's just one through bolt with a nut on the other side. Before we proceed any further, let's go ahead and drain the transmission of the transmission fluid, and that is done via this 14mm hex drain bolt. Prior to removing a transmission on a front-wheel drive vehicle, we also need to remove the drive axles, so let's go ahead and do just that. So I'm going to disconnect the strut to the knuckle, remove the brake caliper as well as the brake discs, and then I will unbolt the tie rod end. Once the drive axles has been unbolted from the hub, they just pop straight out from the transmission. You might need to use a pry bar between where it connects to the transmission, but in my case, the left one popped right out, and with the right one I needed a pry bar to help along. Before disconnecting the transmission fully and also the transmission mount, we need to support the engine somehow, and I definitely prefer to do it from above rather than with a jack underneath. That way I can lift and lower the car as I please. Everything that's attached to the transmission is now removed, so let's go ahead and unbolt the gearbox. And as some of you may have noticed, I didn't include any footage of removing the starter just because it was too cramped in there and it was practically impossible to get a good camera angle. For the actual removal of the transmission itself, it was a bit stubborn. I think that the dowels were pretty seized in place, but after some prying and persuasion, we finally got it removed. And I got some help from a friend, which helped tremendously, so thank you, Isaac. In true race car spirit, we're weighing everything that comes out of the car and everything that goes on the car. And as we're gonna see later on in this video, we actually achieved some more weight savings. And then on to removing the clutch and the flywheel, because I did actually order another flywheel that also comes from a Nissan Micra 1.0 that is lighter and fits bolt on. Besides the obvious benefits of some more weight savings, the engine will become more rev happy and nimble with a lighter flywheel. At first I was contemplating whether or not I should buy a new clutch kit because the one on the car was actually in pretty good condition. It was within the service limit, which is really impressive because I think this is the original clutch that came from the factory. And as we can see, the flywheel from the 1.0 is 1.2 kilograms lighter. So that was definitely a lot of work, but at least now I know exactly what to order and what not to order. And while we wait for new parts, let's go ahead and do some other work to the car, because I actually do have some spare parts laying around right here that I ordered a while ago. We have a new CV joint with a new boot, and I've got new wheel bearings for the front, because I've been hearing some noise from the right front wheel. But let's just go ahead and change both so we have new wheel bearings on the front axle. So yeah, let's get right to it. This wheel bearing did not feel good, which confirms my suspicion of a bad wheel bearing on the right front. If you don't have access to a hydraulic press, there are toolkits that you can buy to press out and in new bearings. I do have a hydraulic press, so I'm definitely going to use it. It makes this job so much easier. So I did actually buy new hubs as well, but unfortunately they came with the wrong thread size. It was actually really hard to find new hubs for this car. Everything else is the same pretty much, all of the important measurements, but the studs are the wrong thread, and also they are a little bit shorter than the OEM ones, which won't fit my new BBS wheels unfortunately. So I'll just keep these ones as spares, and if I find new studs I might replace them and just keep these as spares, just having them laying around. So these rusty old hubs will do for now. Even though they look pretty ugly, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. Now I know I could have just swapped over the studs from the old hubs to the new ones, but I also discovered that the splines were much shorter on the new hub that I ordered, so even though it would technically have fit, I just went with the old OEM Nissan hubs. And there we go, now the bearing feels smooth as glass. And then of course it was the exact same procedure for the left front. Next job on the list while we wait for the new parts to arrive is to replace the CV joint on the right front axle. I've been hearing those typical clicking noises that are associated with a bad CV joint when I turn the steering wheel and accelerate. Replacing a CV joint or boot is definitely not one of my favorite jobs just because everything tends to get so messy. Now it was hard to pick up on camera, but you could definitely feel an abnormal amount of play in the CV joint. I noticed that the two dowels that's supposed to stick on the transmission mismatched between the new and the old transmission. When I pulled off the old one of the dowels stuck to the engine block and one of the dowels stuck to the transmission. Now unfortunately one of the dowels came with the new transmission that I ordered, but it was sitting on the opposite side, if that makes sense, on the new transmission. So what I ended up doing was cutting it off, drilling it out, and then I had to make a new one. So there we go, finally a couple of new parts has arrived that will enable me to finally fit the new clutch kit. I've ordered a new universal clutch install tool, so hopefully that will make life a whole lot easier. Then we can see I ordered the Luke clutch kit, which is the OE supplier for this particular model. So it should be exactly the same one that was on the car from factory. Then I bought some new oil seals, mainly the rear main seal, because that was leaking. And then I also ordered two axle seals for the transmission. I'll have to see if I'm gonna have to replace them, because the seals that's on the transmission right now, they look to be in really good condition, and in my experience they very rarely leak, but yeah, I do have them if I want to change them as an option. Then I also went ahead and ordered this completely new expansion tank from the dealership, straight from Nissan, because the old one is starting to crack a little bit, and it would not be fun to have a whole lot of coolant leak if you're on the track. So I just bite the bullet and bought this one. It was pretty expensive for a piece of plastic, but yeah, it's hard to get a hold of from somewhere else. And yeah, usually they're pretty low quality if you buy them somewhere else. So yeah, I just went ahead and bought this one. So let's go ahead and fit this all to the car. First up is to replace that leaky rear main seal, and what I like to do is to wrap a little bit of electrical tape around a flathead screwdriver and pry it off that way. I think that method works the best, and there's basically no chance of scratching or damaging the crankshaft if you wrap that electrical tape. I can't stress enough how important it is to properly clean off the sealing surfaces. Now, the instructions on the packaging that came with this seal actually said you're supposed to put the seal in dry with no engine oil, which definitely felt really strange to me because this did not look like a PTFE seal, but I decided to just go with the instructions. But as we're going to see later on in the video, that was a huge mistake. I like to scuff off the surface on the new flywheel with some light to medium sandpaper, just to give the new clutch a good surface to bed in on. And no, this won't affect the flatness or the run out at all. In fact, as we're seeing, it barely even removes the paint. The bolts for the flywheel are reusable, but according to the manual, you should coat the threads and the underside of the head with some engine oil. As with most clutch kits, this one comes with a new friction plate, a new pressure plate, and a new throwout bearing. Just like with new brake rotors, I like to wipe off the friction surface with some brake cleaner. I really liked how this universal clutch install tool worked. I think it was really easy to center it on the pressure plate and install it on the car without losing its concentric position. When installing the clutch to the flywheel, make sure that you tighten all of the screws little by little in a crisscross pattern, just to make sure that everything goes on evenly and nothing binds. And then I decided to change out the axle seals after all. It's easier to do now while the transmission is out of the car. And here are all of the points that you need to lubricate with some lithium grease. And the age-old question of how much grease you should use, well, the quick and obvious answer is not too much that it flings off and can settle on the clutch, and not too little so that anything seizes. And then I discovered that one of the sensors on the new transmission was damaged, as we can see here, but luckily for me, all of the sensors are the same comparing the 1.4 transmission to the 1.01, so I just swapped the one from my old transmission that was still in good condition to the new one. And we're now finally ready to put on the new transmission. And the process is basically the same as when I took it off, but in the reverse order. Before I go ahead and put back the battery and the air intake, let's go ahead and replace this coolant expansion tank now that we have easy access. So I've got everything attached now. Again, I didn't fully tighten everything just because I want to just see if the gearbox works, because for what it is, it might not even function properly. I just trusted the seller's word that it should function flawlessly. So yeah, let's just try it, and I will actually fill it up with some normal engine oil, because the transmission fluid that I got right now is very expensive. Also, I want to flush out any contaminants or junk that's in the gearbox right now, because when it came shipped to me, it didn't have any plugs where the axle goes into. It was just open holes there. So I definitely want to clean it out inside, flush it out, and so I just bought the cheapest engine oil that I could find, so that we can test the function and flush it at the same time. And then as soon as I know that it functions properly, I will drain it and replace it with some high quality transmission fluid. And before we go ahead and test start it, I have one more trick up my sleeve regarding the weight reduction. So it's definitely a good idea to lighten the car some more in the front. So I went ahead and bought a heavy duty motorcycle battery, but it's still way lighter than the OEM battery that's on the car right now. And some of you might be concerned that I'm gonna put a motorcycle battery in, but as I said, this is a high capacity motorcycle battery that's suitable for Harley Davidson and such kinds of motorcycles with big engines. So if it can turn over a big engine like that, it should be able to turn over the small engine in my Micra, because some motorcycles actually have larger engines than what's in mine. So yeah, but there's only one problem, and that is the terminals. As we can see, these won't fit up to the car, so I need to make some sort of adapters. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I also went ahead and made a new, smaller, yet very sturdy new battery hold-down bracket. So the transmission seems to be working properly, went through all of the gears and everything seems just fine. I did, however, notice a bit of a rattling noise, but that was just because of the brake disc wobbling around. So I tightened a lug nut on there and that noise went away, so that's really nice. However, there were a really strange problem when I started the car up first. The rear main seal, which I replaced, started to leak. It was dripping pretty bad, so my heart stopped for a second, but I decided to just turn off the car, wipe that down, and then try to start it again, just to be 100% sure that it's leaking and I need to replace it, because I really don't want to pull off the transmission again for nothing. So I did just that, and the leak just mysteriously went away. I've been idling the car for over 10 minutes now. It's up to operating temperature and it's completely bone dry now. So that's really, really strange. I haven't experienced that before with a rear main seal. Unfortunately, this was not the case, as we're going to see later on in the video. The leak did not just miraculously fix itself. As I revved the car more, the leak was apparent once again, but let's not tell past me just yet and keep him happy for just a little bit longer. So yeah, everything seems to be working fine there. However, there are a couple of more leaks that I found. As we can see here, there is some coolant on the ground, and that is because this new expansion tank from Nissan is leaking. Yeah, so much for OEM quality. I think it's this hose right here that connects to the expansion tank itself, which is leaking. No big deal if it's just that. It's probably because of some bad plastic molding that you can file off or something like that. We'll have to see, but yeah, definitely really annoying if you buy an OEM part from Nissan. That's pretty expensive as well. And then we have another leak right here. We can see some drips on the ground, stains there, and that is from the power steering pump. And you guys who remembered, I think one of the first episodes, I mentioned that there were a tiny leak on the power steering pump, but not enough to leave any drips behind. But now it's definitely gotten worse, so I'll need to sort that out in the future. But for now, let's go ahead and drain out the engine oil in the transmission, replace it with some quality transmission fluid, button everything up, and go out for a test drive. And before we go out for a test drive, I have a couple of more surprises for you in this video. So here we go. And that is to build ourselves a custom 3-inch air intake. Now the first plan was to make a 90-degree bend here, and then the aluminum pipe going here, and then another sort of 90-degree bend here, and a short piece of pipe, and the new air filter over here somewhere to simulate the original setup as much as possible. But I don't know if it'll fit with the battery being here, so I might just run a straight pipe here, because it's very close to the original intake position, and I can always build an extra cold air feed here somewhere, just like a flexible hose or something. So I think that will be a pretty good step from the original setup, because the original air intake is known to be pretty restrictive on these cars. So yeah, let's mock everything up and try to build ourselves a new intake. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like the idea of this. It's a really simple design, just a straight pipe, a 90-degree bend, and that's it. I think it's a bit overkill if I want to go just this tight little corner right here, because it's so close to the original spot where the OEM intake sucks in air. So I think we will be just fine. I think this is going to be a good upgrade comparing to stock. The only thing I need to do now is I'm thinking I'm gonna shorten this 90-degree bend here to make everything sit a little bit lower so that it doesn't hit the hood or anything. I think we're good as it sits right now, but just to be safe, to tuck everything down a little bit. And then I need to support this somehow, because right now it's just wiggling over here. So I'm thinking maybe build bracket that attaches to one of these screw holes in the strut tower right here. So let me just come up with a solution for that and continue. Even if I don't see any power gains, it's always really nice to hear that induction noise. I quickly made a 90-degree bracket from stainless steel that attaches to the battery bracket. And here is the new induction kit in all its glory. Next modification to do is to install this short shifter kit. As we can see, the original shifter does not spring back to its neutral position and the throws are very long. The exhaust is in the way from accessing the shifter from underneath, so we need to lower it somehow. And it's enough to just undo them from the hangers and let it rest on the rear axle. We also need to remove this heat shield, which is held on by 5 10mm bolts. Here we can see a broken spring, and this is what caused the shifter not to go back to its neutral position. Luckily, I found a very similar spring in my parts bin. The new kit comes with bigger holes and thread sizes, so we need to drill out these 2 holes in the stock shifter linkage to at least 8mm. And before I forget to mention it, the total weight savings in this episode was 9.2 kilograms. And being that this car is very front heavy, it feels really good to lose that much weight in the front. As we can see, the new shifter definitely has much shorter throws, and overall it just feels more stout. And most importantly, it springs back to its neutral position. There we go. I think that pretty much wrapped things up for this video. Definitely a lot of stuff that's been done in this one. I would have liked to take it out for a test drive to see if the acceleration has changed and see how it feels, but unfortunately it's still winter conditions outside, still ice and snow on a lot of places. But spring is just around the corner, so hopefully in the next video that will come pretty shortly after this one, I will definitely go out for a test drive and see how the new transmission and everything feels. So stay tuned for that one. And now on to some sad news. I know this episode has been sort of an emotional roller coaster for my part at least. You remember what I said about the crank seal, the rear main seal, that it stopped leaking. Unfortunately, it didn't. It only got better once the engine was warmed up, but the next day when I started it, it leaked again. And I've tried it a couple of times now again, same story. When it's cold and sitting overnight, the rear main seal is leaking quite a lot. And the reason for that is, well, L-Ring, the company that I bought the seal from, they said on the instructions, I will post a picture on that right now, as we clearly can see, it says no oil when installing the seal. This was actually printed on the box that came with this seal, so I was in a bit of a dilemma because I thought that the seal just looked like a normal rear main seal, no Teflon, PTFE or something like that. So my first intuition was to install it with some grease or oil. But I decided to go with the instructions because I thought, hey, they probably know better than me, right? Well, no, because I installed it dry, and now obviously we have leaks, and I did contact the company that sold or that makes this seal, and I gave him the part number and everything and asked him if you should install it dry or with oil. And his response was, well, looking at what it's made of and the material, you should definitely install this with oil. So I asked him, why did you send instructions that says it should be installed dry? And he said, well, there must have been some sort of mistake on the printing of the box. Well, a very costly mistake. In one way, it feels good that the mistake wasn't on my behalf, but still, all of those hours are wasted now, so I need to redo this whole process again with removing the transmission and clutch and everything. But fortunately for you guys, you won't have to see that again, so I will do that off camera, and until the next episode, that leak will definitely have been taken care of. So yeah, let's just pretend it didn't happen, and I will see you guys in the next episode with a non-leaking Micra ready to hit the streets. So see you then, and have a really good one. Bye.